Perfect. And let me do this. There we go. Perfect. Well, good morning. Apologies for those of you who have joined us. We've had some interesting glitches with Microsoft and having to get their support folks to solve the problem. So for those of you who have joined us, thank you for your patience. Hopefully others will jump on. I am Richard Seeline, Executive Director of Future Proofing America and the CEO Managing Partner of Roar Partners. Some of you have listened in and participated in some of our prior sessions that we've done both in person and remotely virtually. It's been great. We've had lots of energy, and our partners and speakers this morning from Cohn Reznick participated in our most recent town hall in Washington, D.C. On March 19th, which was our fifth and final town hall on this transforming resilient investment. And we were honored to have not just 6 members of our advisory board, but 3 chairmen of 3 key congressional committees and subcommittees to learn about this framework and to endorse its implementation. But one of the elements that really emerged out of this, and Ted, as well, and Jessie, we had an opportunity to brief 30 members of the National Association of Counties Resilience Task Force. And one of the elements that began to emerge out of all of this is the reality that there really is a lot of funding and resources out there. The problem is how to find it and how to get it integrated into projects and programs. So I thought what we would do this morning is cover just very quickly, Jessie and Ted, some of this, why now, and then really get it into your remarks and observations, and then have us talk about some of the opportunities for ways to lean into these emerging and available resources, open it up for folks that are going to join us, and then really end it on this call to action that we started. So hard to read. You'll get a copy of this. And again, several of you have already seen this, but what we've been looking at from the Future Proofing America Collaborative and the research and data that we've been collecting with our partners, who you'll see in a few minutes, is nothing is headed in the right direction. And jokingly, let me see if I can get Jessie to laugh again. I am often referred to as the Vin Diesel of doom. Okay, Jessie, come on, come up with the fake laugh. All right, but none of these numbers are headed in the right direction. The amount of loss claims, uninsured loss claims, the amount of impacts on different asset classes, the amount of money that it is costing on the federal, state, and local side for constantly rebuilding. All of these are headed in the wrong direction. And then you start looking at where these gaps are occurring in insurance, both property casualty, commercial, business continuity. That gap is widening. And as of just a couple of days ago, the National Flood Insurance Program in many states saw a really downward trend on folks re-upping their own flood insurance. So if you've got flood insurance or any form of property casualty gaps on one side, it becomes even more difficult on the mortgage side, because there is this cascading scenario where mortgage defaults after these events are continuing to trend line. And if you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. If you can't get a certain kind of insurance, you can't even do your refinancing. Then we started looking at the different sectors out there for which assets are being devalued across the country, depending on where you are geographically and what type of peril, you are seeing a pressure on your value of either your asset, or if you're a large investment house, a large, private equity, much less owning a significant mortgage portfolio, you're seeing assets becoming devalued. So part of what we've been focused on in this Future Proofing America framework, and what Ted and Jessie will cover today, is how do you overcome some of the hurdles for real estate developers to spend enough money to make sure that their residential, commercial, industrial, public sector assets are getting retrofitted or constructed in a higher value for resilience. At the same time, we've got elected and appointed officials who are overwhelmed on constantly having to go to the taxpayer or some form of appropriation to fund constant rebuilding. And then, last but not least, if you look at the economic sectors of this country, whether it's oil and gas, logistics and transportation, you name it, these persistent amount of disasters that are impacting operations, and therefore their economic proposition for, creating goods, transporting goods, you name it, are also having these impacts. So this kind of level of why this, why now frustration really led us to forming this Future Proofing America framework, which really sets a value proposition for pre-disaster risk mitigation. It's been noted in a series of academic and federal agencies and academies that it's a 1 to 6 or better, all the way up to 1 to 13, 1 to 33. That gets a little bit, I think, stretching the reality. But we believe that there is a way to design, engineer, construct, and obviously finance, maintain, and operate assets at a 1 to 6 or better cost benefit. What the challenge has been is how to organize and align multiple forms of capital. So this is the group that we've relied on significantly over the past 2 years to give us insight and counsel, come up with this framework, come up with solutions that we refer to as actionable, based on actionable intelligence for forecasted, not looking backwards, but what we're seeing ahead of us. And therefore, what can you do about it? And how do you ultimately design, deliver, and deploy the capital required? Now, I'm going to note one other thing, Ted and Jessie, is Fitch Ratings announced and delivered this past December new guidance that essentially said that they will rate infrastructure and project finance at a better rating with more pre-disaster mitigation, more future proofing included in it. And by Fitch making that guidance announcement, it essentially begins to drive down the cost of capital and becomes more attractive that a project that's been rated by Fitch that way will ultimately attract different forms of reinsurance, and we believe other forms of public capital. So that Fitch rating, coupled with what you're going to hear today, I think we're at a game-changing point. But one of the things that Jessie and Ted have talked with me about, and others, is we are in truly a transformational stage of federal devolution. That was over on the left was, and this is a very simplified, Ted, form of a map of all the different types of federal funding sources. We believe that there's $5.5 trillion of capital that, if organized the right way, could be unleashed for these type of disaster projects. But we're also talking not just about the sticks and bricks. We're talking about individuals, families, small business. We're talking about people. So when we talk about projects, we talk about sticks and bricks. When we talk about programs, we're talking about people in their communities. So when you hear what Ted and Jessie will talk about today, and I call them our dream team, um, these are folks who come from, and I'll let them do better introductions than I will, who come from very deep, robust work done at Treasury and HUD, but now in their position at Cohn Reznick, it really rounds out the reason why we are fortunate to collaborate and partner with them. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ted and Jessie, and you'll just tell me when they advance the slides. But I'm really honored to have the two of y'all be our partners, be our advisors, and today share with us some of your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, for that very warm introduction. And good morning, good afternoon to all the attendees today, as well as everyone who may be listening to this at a future recording. It's a pleasure to be here, and many thanks, of course, to Roar Partners and the Future Proofing America for their collaboration over the past couple years on this incredibly important topic. If you could go to the next slide, please, Richard.
Yes, sir.
Skip one more. So my name's Ted Kowalsky. I'll talk a little bit about myself in a minute, but I am the industry practice leader for public finance and sustainability, which is a new function here at Cohn Reznick. Some of you may be familiar with Cohn Reznick. We are one of the nation's top leading CPA assurance advisory and tax firm. We have a 100-year history operating nationally for thousands of clients across these different spaces, and our public sector practice has ministered north of 3,200 state, local, and federal clients on all of the topics we're going to be touching upon today. If you can go to the next slide. A little bit about myself, and I'll hand it over to Jessie next. So my career has been always working in sustainability and community development topics. I've been here at Cohn Reznick for 2 years now with a primary focus on energy transition, environmental risk management, and community development topics. Prior to joining Cohn Reznick, I worked at a different management consulting firm on the same topics. But before that, really the lion's share of my career was having previously served at the U.S. Treasury Department. My last role there, I was the executive director of an office called the Office of Grants and Asset Management that oversaw about a $45 billion portfolio of federal financial management and federal grant programs. So previously, I'd served in executive roles on the Troubled Asset Relief Program. I oversaw the Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill Trust Fund and the grant programs under the Restore Act. I oversaw a $26 billion renewable energy grants program under the Recovery Act. And of course, when the nation mobilized its significant financial and human capital resources in the service of responding to the pandemic, I was deployed by the previous Trump administration and Secretary Mnuchin on the CARES Act, the Emergency Capital Investment Program, and then ultimately with the incoming administration working on the American Rescue Plan. So my career has always been at this nexus of public finance levered up for public good, crowding in private capital to accelerate impact and to accelerate investment opportunities. And my career trajectory at Treasury mirrors in some ways what Jessie's own career was as well. And I was fortunate, even in my time at Treasury working on the American Rescue Plan, to get to collaborate with Jessie and her team on the CDBG program. So I'm going to stop talking about my own career and hand it over to her now, and then we'll get into the core of today's presentation. So Jessie, over to you.
Thanks, Ted. I'll be fairly brief. I've also been at Cohn Reznick for about 2 years in the government and public sector advisory. I know a lot about federal grant compliance, and I worked at HUD. I worked my way up through policy and field positions, mostly working on the community development block grant program, but as a field rep, I was also working on the home program and the emergency solutions grant program and HOPWA, which is the Housing for Persons with AIDS program. Worked on technical assistance and did, I don't know, I think there are about 29 federal register notices with my name on them with regulations or with for disaster recovery. We have a picture within a picture, Richard.
Sorry. Sorry, I'm not sure why you did that. Okay.
So I also have a lot of experience with the Section 108 loan guarantee program. So stacking deals project by project that's used, CDBG, community development block grant is used for guaranteeing those loans. And we also got, what happened at headquarters is that we would catch all of the problems. So when things went wrong, or very, very wrong, and our field office couldn't handle them, we were working on very complex policy issues, trying to make sure that to deliver the mission and, if possible, the return for projects and activities that were assisted some way with Community Development Block Grant or Section 108. And we also created new programs, such as the CDBG disaster recovery. I came up through the disaster recovery line of business, the neighborhood stabilization program during the foreclosure crisis, where we were definitely dealing with trying to save projects all the time. And, trying to figure out, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what's the strategic reason was for creating a constraint essentially on a financial resource such as CDBG, and whether we needed a rule or just best practices guidance and things like that. And we're going to talk more about that today, about how you can navigate through the constraints of your financing.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate Jessie, you joining with me today to talk about this topic. And hopefully everyone listening to this webinar understands that this is the moment in time, and this is the great challenge of the future of America, is really how to go about making better use of public money and crowding in the significant amounts of patient private capital that's standing on the sideline, which Richard and the folks at We're Partners in Future Proofing America have alluded to, could be north of $5.5 to $6 trillion. On this slide, we're laying out probably something that everyone on this call understands pretty well, which is the traditional mechanics of public finance. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, except to emphasize the point that one of the biggest challenges nowadays between public sector entities at the state, local, federal, and nonprofit and philanthropic level, as well as private capital, is they are speaking different taxonomies and speaking different languages. And the way forward for improving resilience across the nation to tackle all of the challenges that Richard has mentioned earlier is really around helping to translate and get all of the different parties together to tackle this Tower of Babel going on. As you can see here on the left, the traditional mechanics of public finance around public revenues, raising public debt, and ultimately making public expenditures for all of the purposes laid out in the middle column around infrastructure development, public utilities, housing and community development, and environmental resilience. But the challenge, of course, is how do you go about using more modest public finance that will be available in the future to leverage in and crowd in private capital. So I'm going to pause now and hand it over to Jessie, because this is a topic that she and I spend pretty much all of our time every day on, and she has a lot of thoughts based upon her substantial experience in this space. And then Jessie, if you'll hand it back to me, we can talk a little bit more about some of our thoughts in terms of the path forward. So Jessie, over to you.
Thanks, Ted. So, and I wanted to also acknowledge Roar for having us come and do this, as it's something that was an obsession of mine, and I really, resilience especially, and sustainability, and how do you get money to worthwhile projects. But when we talk about assembling the financing, like for sustainable and resilient development, we often immediately jump to the capital stacks and sources and structures. But in my experience, the challenge isn't just access to capital, it's navigating the system constraints, the economic constraints, whatever the funding rules are that shape how the capital can be deployed. So sometimes you're getting money from a funder and you want to do something slightly different with it, or you think there's a constraint. And there's a lot of fog in the areas of these stacking financing as well. So my lens today is how do we move around our constraints, not ignore them, not fight them head on because that will cause delays, but work within and across them in a thoughtful way as nimbly as possible. So to start with, the thing that you need to get everybody to agree on, and almost everybody at this point does agree on, so you define your mission for your project essentially, is why is a resilient or sustainable project worth financing in the first place? And Richard got into that a little bit, and but you need to know it before you jump into your structure and constraints of the actual financing you get. The projects matter from a finance perspective, not just a mission perspective. So you're trying to do a project that will have lower long-term costs and stronger performance that you can get more profit out of, or that one of your funders can, or it will serve more people, or whatever it is. Projects that are designed with durability and adaptability in mind tend to require fewer costly repairs, experience less disruption over their useful life, maintain their value or raise it more consistently. And what that means that what might look like a higher upfront cost can translate into lower total cost of ownership and more stable performance over the life of the asset, which makes the assets, number two, more insurable and often more financeable. So increasingly, insurers and lenders are paying attention to asset durability and risk exposure, or you can put it the other way around, risk exposure and asset durability. Projects that are built or retrofitted to withstand as many stressors as you're aware of, basically, are easier to insure. And in some cases, may be possible to insure when it's not durably built, won't be insurable. They may face fewer coverage limitations that are going to present a stronger credit profile when you need to refinance. And in some markets, governments are moving from nice to have on resilience to a prerequisite for financing. Both governmental and private are starting to say, well, how do we know that if you have a tornado, a hurricane, a flood, a hailstorm, our assets still there? But you want to also remember that those events are relatively rare. You're going to have a lot more regular everyday days than you are going to have bad days. And I hope that continues. And so you design for everyday value as well. So the strongest examples of resilient, sustainable projects improve daily quality of life, support economic activity, provide maybe community amenities. It depends on your community whether you need to do that. They're going to work on a normal Wednesday and not just on the bad day. So you can build infrastructure that has recreation, but is also drainage on a bad day. Buildings that are energy efficient, and because they're energy efficient, they're more comfortable and they have lower running costs. But on that bad day, you want to have faster recovery. The goal is you have the bad day and you're up and ready for the business. The building is doing it, the structure, the project is doing what it was supposed to do the next day. So you have faster recovery, continuity of use, return to operation, reduce downtime, minimize cascading economic impacts from that downtime. And the speed of recovery is a financial variable. Yes, it's sold on the government side and the philanthropic side as, it's a good thing, a moral thing. But the faster an asset gets back in use, the less value is lost. So it's a good thing from the finance side as well. And that makes it smart, right? So why aren't you stacking all your deals with resilience or sustainability in mind? The other thing is that I've already alluded to philanthropy, and so has Ted. You can attract aligned capital in philanthropy or impact investors or public funding programs if you're aware of and building into the deal this resilient strip or sustainable strip. And it will better align then with multiple funding priorities. There will be people in the deal who just need to make the money on the deal. There are people in the deal who are like, oh, this is resilient, we'll invest because it aligns with our funding priority. And it opens the door to these blended capital stacks that Ted is going to be talking about. So in this way, having a resilient or sustainable project, depending on how you define it, can expand the universe of capital you can reach for, if you can navigate the constraints to access it. So let's talk about what the constraints are. Funding silos that don't know about each other. We all know federal and state and private programs can get very siloed. Eligibility and compliance rules that are sort of similar but not exactly the same. Timing mismatches when funds are appropriated or available versus project readiness. Risk tolerance differences among your capital providers can be a real joy to navigate. In institutional habits, a lot of people, a lot of funders just do the same thing every year or the same thing every day. And you're talking to them, you're on their first sustainable or resilient project. This is a story to them, and anything with a story makes financial lenders and stuff a little allergic. So, you need to know how to talk the talk for each of your different financing sources. That's a constraint, and it's on you to learn how to get around it. Most communities don't fail to advance projects because they don't have ideas about what they want to do. Communities have tons of ideas, funders have tons of ideas. It's just projects will stall if the system isn't designed to align the timing, rules, and incentives. And you get that first project through, and the system tends to start aligning around it. I also I've written about and I've talked about the idea of nimbleness, not just speed, but the ability to quickly adapt financing and structural design to local conditions, local needs, local goals, present and future. And so financial nimbleness means flexible sequencing. You need to find out which financing in your stack can go in when and be able to move it around to be able to deal with some of the constraints and some of the financing. Not all your funding needs to land at once, but you need to know what's the first dollar in, what does it unlock, what's the second one, what's the last one. You want modular capital stacks as much as possible, and to think about it in layers that can be swapped or adjusted. It's not just one big pool that you dump the financing in, unless you're really lucky. That would be optimal. It just isn't what you have. That's a constraint. You want to have decision-making agility. You want to know who makes what decisions and who communicates, and who just communicates decisions. And faster iteration on your deal structure if constraints shift on you, if a funder shifts. So nimble systems and approaches don't eliminate the constraints, they just let you work around them. I also have an article on rebuilding nimble for disaster recovery that's about physical nimbleness, and that, if you can get the regulatory nimbleness going in your community, that's a partner to this. Several years ago, I worked on the National Disaster Resilience Competition, which was run by HUD, but it was 43 different federal agencies got involved in running a competition, hunting for resilience investments, and 48 states qualified, along with several cities. They had had disasters in the previous 3 years, and so they qualified to compete. And 13 projects were selected for a total of $1 billion. And the communities were asked to assemble really complex financing structures under pretty tight timelines. And when we learned some things, one is that integration beats optimization. So those of you who are satisficers as opposed to optimizers, you know what I'm talking about. You can't make things perfect. You can't maximize every single funding source independently, but you can get the strongest proposals, integrated their funding streams, and figured out how to layer them in a productive way so that everybody got something and nobody came out at a loss. It was less about perfecting one source and more about aligning imperfect ones as best you could so that they'd stay together and stick like Legos. Capacity is as important as capital. You need to have knowledge. Communities with strong intermediaries or partners performed much better in the competition and in the actual building of the projects. CDFIs, local governments, cross-sector partners can translate for federal financing or local financing, and also for the private sector funders. And being able to spot the best uses in BRAID funding often matters more than the funding itself, the exact source. Your narrative shapes your financing. I talked earlier about stories. A lot of these are going to be your first resilient project. Funders respond to coherent, investable narratives, not just technical compliance. They like to know about technical compliance, but you want to tell a compelling story about outcomes. And that doesn't mean walking in with just spreadsheets. It means knowing you know why you're doing what you're doing, both from a financing and a mission perspective. To move around your constraints, you're going to want concrete approaches. Start with the constraint, not the capital. Instead of asking what funding's available, ask what's the biggest constraint preventing this project, this deal from moving? Do you have a gap in pre-development financing? Do you have risk exposure in the early stages? This is the first time anybody's ever done this. Or you have a timing lag between your major sources of funding. Then figure out, like, how do you use bridge mechanisms to unlock your long-term capital? Bridge loans, guarantees, credit enhancements. Those are financial tools, which is what we're here to talk about, but they're also coordination tools. And they're ways of, getting your partners either to the table or at least aware of each other and bridging from one thing to the next. You want to get early wins. You need to build your credibility. Pilot phases are very useful, small initial investments, beta tests. Momentum will attract capital, but get the early wins. If you're going to freak out about getting something done, freak out about that first project. Progress de-risks perception. And when everybody's comfortable that you can do this little, then you can start trying to do it big. So if your funders are all trying to solve for different problems, public, private, and philanthropical capital might be solving for different definitions of success. They may have different metrics. You need to find a way to project manage it, to translate across the definitions. Find some kind of shared outcome, like one bad day after a disaster or something like that. That's a shared outcome. Community stability, economic return, long-term viability, and that's the rock bottom story. Whenever anything else goes wrong, you said, remember, we agree on this one thing. Keep a point of agreement. And that really helps because then they'll help you navigate constraints. Your partners will say, oh yeah, no, we really do agree on that core thing. And so the rest of it becomes small stuff. And leverage your intermediaries to be your system navigators. Find CDFIs, community lenders, mission-driven institutions, anchor institutions like hospitals in your project area. They're not just there to provide like capital. You're looking also for partners who can interpret your systems, absorb complexity, use their local credibility to say this would be a good thing, and they also can connect you. I'm a friend of so-and-so and a friend of so-and-so, or I've worked with them on this and I've worked with them on that. Let's get together and have a conversation because this project really needs to go, is a really useful thing. So for community development finance, the field is evolving from just being a capital provider to being a system integrator. And that's been happening in community development block grant and community development field forever. But it's got to happen everywhere for these complex projects. So success is going to depend on structuring deals across multiple programs, spotting, anticipating your constraints early, build the partnerships that can persist beyond one project so that first win gets you the subsequent wins and helps you expand. And you have to navigate complexity to deal with resilience or sustainability. And your project can still move forward, even if you have a whole bunch of constraints, if you learn how to move through them intentionally. You say, oh, there they are. Here's our plan. So, Ted, back to you now that you've let me talk about my obsession.
Of course. Well, your obsession is really a value to the industry, and I appreciate your insights, and I hope the audience appreciated hearing some of the insights from the front line and from the trenches. And I'm going to go ahead and take the baton now and really emphasize some of the points that I think Jessie raised, which is at a high level, the one thing that I think public sector entities need to become a lot more attuned to, particularly with the state of play changing and the path forward being a different one, is understanding the importance of adopting a project finance mindset. Now, I'm not a wizard of project finance here. This diagram that you have, this rather colorful diagram in front of you, is something that anyone can pull from a Finance 101 textbook of what a traditional capital stack looks like. However, in many ways, shapes, and forms, this is something very new to public sector clientele at the state, local, municipal, and even federal levels. Understanding the mechanics of how you integrate financing and how you stack and braid. The word stack and braid as a euphemism is very easy to understand. It simply means lots of pots of money, thread them together. voila, the project happens. But the reality is it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more complex, particularly when you get into the mechanics of what is most attractive to private capital investors. In their world, they've been operating with syndicated financing structures for centuries, frankly, back to the days of Renaissance banking, and different ways to leverage different incentive programs, particularly driven by national tax codes. And the reality is most public sector entities simply don't have the capacity to understand this language, let alone facilitate the deals. And I've highlighted on the left some of the probably nightmares that have kept some of the audience members here on this webinar up at night, which is gaps in capacity, understanding how to perform proper grants administration, debt constraints, fiscal constraints at the state, local, and county level. There's only so much that folks can do, and if you don't even have the personnel and the human capital resources to understand the language, when investors come to the door with potential deals and wanting to work with state, local, municipal, and county officials, oftentimes the deal simply doesn't happen because they're speaking different languages. And I think if I can emphasize an important point to your listeners today, it's really to begin to adapt and adopt a project finance mindset and bring in the resources that you need to advise you on the path ahead. Richard, if you go to the next slide. I'm going to highlight a number of different exciting things going on right now, which are really going to be jet fuel to the public finance landscape in the service of resilience going forward. And I'm highlighting 4 of them here. We're going to talk about 2 of them very briefly. There's a lot more information in the packet that you'll receive after today's webinar. And of course, Jessie and I are available to talk about these topics as much as you would like at any point on behalf of Cohn Reznick, because this is something that's very near and dear to core mission activities that we're focused on right now. Of course, you may have heard something in the press going on right now about the new once-a-decade designations for opportunity zones. These are special federal tax districts around the nation that are really intended to encourage private investment and attract capital to perform significant community development. Happens once every 10 years. The nomination process begins on July 1st. It's open for 90 days, and then everyone will be open for business starting in January. There's another model here called resilience utility districts, which Roar Partners and Future Proofing America are really pioneering in helping to provide thought leadership. There's these ideas of maritime prosperity zones, which are currently being discussed by Congress right now. Essentially, it's opportunity zones for ports intended to encourage domestic shipbuilding, as well as commercial development, economic development, and coastal resilience around America's ports. And of course, the last one is property assessed clean energy, CPACE programs, which I pick a little bit of a bone with because it has the words clean energy in it. But as you'll see in just a minute, the financing mechanisms can be used for an entirely broad swath of different resilience investments that are intended to make the built infrastructure more attractive to private investors. Next slide, Richard. So we're going to talk very quickly and briefly about opportunity zones. Of course, opportunity zones were first implemented under the Tax and Jobs Acts of 2017. At the time, approximately 8,700 opportunity zones were designated around the country. It's estimated, although no one knows, that between $30 billion and $100 billion of private capital were crowded into those opportunity zones for the purposes of economic and community development. The program was so successful, even in this modest first effort, that they are fine-tuning the program. In the One Big Beautiful Bill last year, the program was made permanent, so this is going to be now a cyclical 10-year investment opportunity. And the ambitions and some of what we heard is potentially hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital are at stake. Right now, as we speak, state authorities are working with municipal, county, and local executives to come up with their business cases to submit their nominations to Treasury. Those nominations begin on July 1st, will be open for 90 days. Treasury will make the designations and certifications this fall, and then those districts will be open for business starting in January. Next slide, Richard. Right now, entities need to be thinking about the age-old question from one of my personal favorite movies, Field of Dreams: if we build it, will they come? And that was one of the big challenges of Opportunity Zone 1.0, was there was an assumption in many places that naturally, if the district exists, investors know how to find it. And the reality was a lot more fragmented. Certain districts around the country we've seen, and we've met with some of them, were already primed for investment, and the investment flowed to districts that were already fairly urban, had ready-made projects, and were already close to major urban centers. But the reality is, where the investment is needed, the communities that are most vulnerable are the ones that just did not get the investment last go around. And of course, even in consultations and what we've heard from Treasury and elsewhere, is there's really an emphasis in trying to spread the investment opportunities around the nation with a heavier emphasis on rural districts. What I encourage every entity we talk to do is to please begin working with your state entities, begin working with your local investors, begin using data to identify potential project pipeline in these districts, and begin engaging with capital markets, looking at what worked the first time around, what your ambitions are for the second time around, and begin thinking about what the entire menu of potential state, local incentive programs is to help attract and encourage private investment. We heard from one county executive that we met with recently that they had a number of opportunity zones the first time around, but one of the big challenges they had was they tried reaching out, they tried marketing them, they didn't really know how to do market transformation and engagement, and as a result, they just didn't see the investment they were hoping for, and they're looking for a new strategy this go around, and we're in consultations and talking with them about this right now. So opportunity zones is really something that folks need to be very focused on, because again, across the wall, all the private capital markets participants are very focused on it right now. And even we at Cohn Reznick here, we have an entire commercial practice that's been working in opportunity zones for the last decade, worked with hundreds and hundreds of developers, investors, and project sponsors across hundreds of these things. And we have a lot of insights, of course, that we've been leveraging ourselves in helping to advise clients and help them think through how to make the most of the opportunity zone designations. Richard, next slide. I'm going to talk briefly about CPACE as well. This is probably something that many of the listeners today have heard of before. Again, commercial property assessed clean energy. Although, as you can see on the right here, this isn't just about clean energy. It's about an entire menu of upgrades that are eligible in the built environment to make assets more resilient, more attractive to investors, and more hospitable to the business community as well as residents. Covers multifamily, it can cover some public properties, covers light industrial, hard industrial, can cover port communities as well. And really the biggest advantage of CPACE investing and what makes it most attractive to capital markets is that the repayment is actually tied to the annual tax assessment process. So that makes the repayment of these loans more senior than traditional financing like HELOC lending, et cetera. And also the loans convey with the building. So that immediately makes CPACE eligible properties immediately attractive to investors. And probably the biggest example you hear about this, particularly post-pandemic, is all of the commercial to residential upgrades and conversions that are going on around the nation. Those tend to be CPACE loans. And it's a really unique opportunity. And we're seeing, if you move to the next slide, CPACE is expanding nationally all over the place. Currently, there are, we'll be moving to the next slide in just a second.
Yep, there we go.
There are 40 states that have implemented CPACE programs, and they come, it's almost like Baskin-Robbins 31 flavors for those that remember. They come in all different shapes, sizes, and flavors around the country. In some states, you have individual bonds tied to individual projects, and those bonds are highly attractive to investors. Elsewhere, you have state administrators managing entire statewide programs. But again, one of the big challenges with CPACE is local authorities need to engage advisors that can help them understand the language of CPACE from the investor perspective. My colleagues and I recently met with another county executive in a different part of the country, and they were talking about their experiences with CPACE. And what they told us is in the past few years, they actually had investors show up with CPACE opportunities and potential projects to meet with the county executives and talk about incentive structures. But the people at the county actually didn't even understand the mechanics of CPACE. And as the actual quote told to us was, so the deal simply just didn't happen. It kind of just went away. And that's exactly what municipal authorities do not want to hear. These are multi-billion-dollar deals available throughout the country, and you want that commercial activity coming into your district. And so all the more reason why state, local, and municipal authorities really should be thinking about CPACE as well as opportunity zones. And the beauty of them is they are not mutually exclusive. You can stack a CPACE opportunity inside an opportunity zone and lever it up for even more impact and more accelerated financing from the capital markets that will be more attractive to investors. Next slide, Richard. Now, that said, this sounds all rosy. I don't want people to think, wow, I'll take 3 of those. because there are realities of understanding the mechanics and nuances of these programs because they are new programs. But again, getting back to what I said earlier, the most important thing that I hope your audience will take today is the importance of beginning to work with technical assistance authorities, work with trade associations. We're doing a lot of conversations right now with this National Association of Counties, talking with folks at the Council for Development Finance Agencies, trying to get some inroads with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to talk about these. Begin working with the folks that can provide the technical assistance and begin learning the language of capital markets. Because once you begin to bring in the advisors and the folks that can advise you on the public sector side in the language of capital markets, then you can engage and understand exactly what it is that will attract the investors, so that the investors aren't simply going for the cities around the country where they know there's already big projects. States are looking to really diversify their portfolio and drive the investment where it's most needed, particularly from a resilience perspective, because oftentimes the resilience is needed in rural communities, in second and third tier by GDP sized cities around the country, and other counties where even at a federal level, the government is looking to move operations. This is one of the hot topics right now, is how can, as you devolve the funding sources, how can you also devolve the foundational aspects of government to be closer to the constituents that they're ultimately servicing? And you want to drive in the investment to create the economic opportunities to attract that kind of interest, to attract that kind of development. Next slide. So that's Jessie and I talking about our view from the trenches and front lines around resilience, public finance, and how to attract investment to your opportunities. I'm done kind of with my speaking. So Richard, I'll hand it back to you if you have some questions that have been submitted by other members of the audience, or if there's other dialogue topics you'd like to cover, happy to touch upon those too.
This is great. I've got 3 pages of notes off to the side here because I always learn from the two of y'all. Every time I have a chance to engage, and I'm thankful for y'all's collaboration and partnership. I want to kind of talk about this unlocking and integrating all forms of capital, right? So when we started looking at Jessie and Ted, the $5.5 trillion of capital that we keep on referring to, you both hit right to our point of where we think the opportunity truly exists. So I'm going to go back to some of the comments, Jessie, that you and Ted made, and really kind of get some sense of how we move this unlocking, integrating piece of it. Because Jessie, again, I always learn from you, so let me ask a first question of both of y'all. All right. And you both hinted on this. There is an urgency, there's a need, and there's a demand. And at the same time, there is a lot of communications gaps in being able to explain to not just an elected or appointed official, but now we have multiple stakeholders, right? So I want to spend just a minute or two getting y'all's thoughts about how to build that narrative. Jessie, you talked about it, but I think you just said, Ted, a few minutes ago, there's a lot of tools in the toolkit, and that can be overwhelming, right? Mm-hmm. Just give me the silver bullet, Ted. Just give me the one thing that will work, right?
There's no silver bullet, really, but I alluded to getting your first successful project. It doesn't actually have to be yours. Right. There are some successes in some places already. And so that's one of the reasons like we talk to the national organizations, and is, California or Florida may have pulled off a successful resilience project. It looks a lot like what you want.
Right.
So you need that. You need to be able to talk to these more cautious financial sources with an early win. It's not your early win, but it's somebody's.
Right. Jessie, can I press you and Ted on that? If y'all were to say, pull a card out of whatever your work, or do you got an example of a project that if you said, look, I want to point you at something that I did, Jessie, or I did, Ted, or something, do you got kind of an example off the top of your head? I apologize if not. We can get a bunch of case studies. But has something come to mind that says, boy, that one went the way it should go? Does that come to mind?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kind of step on this one. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously, in the interest of client confidentiality, there's only so much I can talk about. But,
Right,
we've
right.
certainly worked, we have worked across the space on everything from rent to own opportunities in the multifamily, rent to own opportunities in multifamily housing in opportunity zones. So, for instance,
Right.
we've advised on deals with local communities where a multifamily property was rehabilitated, it was weatherized, the building envelope was increased, it was ultimately designated for low to moderate income housing. The renters in that property, after so many years of successfully paying rent, then have the option to buy that property. So no longer that this is helping to convert them from rental to ownership, which helps to improve the tax base, but also to help folks put down roots and really get a piece of the American dream. That all happened in an opportunity zone. It was a complex stacking of different tax incentives at the state, county, and local level as well. That's one example. Of course, we're talking right now with another county. They're doing a major redevelopment of a shopping center. This is one of the big problems right now post-pandemic, but also just with the nature of American buying habits is that shopping malls aren't what they used to be. Certainly,
Right.
probably when all of us were growing up. And oftentimes, people are tired of the local shopping mall that's 80% empty and has maybe the DMV in it. And there's a lot of work going on right now trying to convert shopping malls into new commercial residential properties in downtown centers that we're talking with counties on that right now. And of course, CPACE. CPACE, the name of the game right now, and has been for the past couple of years post-pandemic, has really been commercial office space downtown being converted to residential. And it's not always easy and it's not always cheap because commercial buildings were designed for different purposes besides allowing human beings to live in them. But it's happening all over the place. But we're seeing a much broader spread of how CPACE financing can be used, particularly as states begin to internalize that these financing structures are more senior than traditional debt. They're highly coveted by investors, and they can also be used for a lot more than clean energy, which again is the bone
Right.
I pick with why it's
Right.
called. So lots
Right.
of projects we're seeing right now, and those are just a couple of the highlights that we've seen to date.
Well, let me play
yeah. I
off
mean,
of
there's a lot of. I mean, I have a lot of examples at HUD with community development block grant and CDBG mitigation, CDBG MIT. I mean,
Yeah.
they tend to be larger, but just thinking about like the most common disasters are floods and hail.
Right.
And with flooding, sometimes you have to build a new community for a whole community to move. HUD helped with one of the very first ones in Valmeyer, Illinois, and it flooded again not long after, and it was an enormous success, but not for the people who hadn't moved. The people up on the bluff did great. They had one
Right.
bad day.
Right.
And that move that created, there was a big master plan development for the people who moved. It was a huge project at the time, only partially government funded. And then there's cascading examples. That's a rural example that from all over. For hail, there are like whole community retrofits that are in the wings coming,
Right.
needing financing to get the hardened roofs so that they can survive. Now that we don't have dime size hail, we have, softball size hail
Right.
down the whole middle of the country. And that's a lot of roofs that need to be dealt with. And, all the individual people could get their, and buildings could get their loans, or you could do a big project. And use these financing tools to take care of the whole community at once. So there's just one bad day for the whole community as opposed to a house at a time. You have the early wins that some people have put these roofs on and they don't even get dents,
Right.
when there's hail.
Right.
So you can
Right.
point to that, take it in and say, how do we scale this early win?
So let me play off of both of y'all talking about housing, because yesterday was kind of an interesting day for me. Starting with, or Monday was, starting with a pretty extensive conversation with Roy Wright, who is the head of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, the whole Fortified Home program, with which we have a collaboration with IBHS, and we're about ready to announce this whole residential resilience marketplace and bringing these pieces together. But both of you just noted that a lot of these projects are, one, solving the the housing gap that we naturally have in the country. But if you go to that 12% of the nation has 90% of the forecasted losses, including the Department of Defense bases where 70% of the bases are in highly vulnerable areas, right? We're trying to solve one problem, Jesse, that's just the natural, so, issues of getting more housing available, all right? At the same time, it's where we're building them that needs to transform. So the point that we've been talking with y'all and others about is that you're in many cases not solving one problem, you're solving multiple problems, right? Which, Ted, then means that the stakeholder engagement is just as much tied to the capital stack, meaning the number of pieces in the capital stack are trying to align with those multiple stakeholders. Am I saying that the right way?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment and description.
Right. And so, Jesse, when I've listened to you and others, if I'm going to build housing, I probably need to be thinking about not just the appropriate pricing of housing, but I also got to look at it from a workforce housing. I probably have some issues about making sure that the housing is made to not attract mold, all
Well,
those
let's
kinds
peel
of
that
things.
apart a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Because there
yeah,
are always going to be players in a housing deal that are only thinking about making their money, and that's
right,
fine. But they should, they'll be in with the ultimate owner, if there's public investment, the public investor, and there'll be more ideas at the table. And the project has to solve for all of the above.
right, right,
Right. So it's fine if you're a funder and you just want to think about your piece and the heck with this resilience piece, but there will be other players in any big enough deal that are going to be like, nah, we're also got to solve for social cohesion um, and the one bad day thing and resilience or sustainability. We want energy efficiency, and it has to be designed in, and you have to put the project together so that these things all work together into a thing that can happen,
right.
right?
So part of our capital stack, and I don't want to open the big door completely, but it's one that y'all both know that, we are very focused on, is insurance and mortgages, right? Which are hand in glove, as I said at the beginning. So, Jesse and Ted, to your point is, if I can't get insurance because I'm not building it the right way, or I'm building it in an area that I really need to build, you can go all the way forward you want on your traditional return on my investment. But the fact of the matter is, you're either not going to get insurance or you're going to get insurance, but it is going to eat into your pro forma in a significant way, right? So I think what both of y'all are reconfirming is that these tools, whether it's opportunity zones or seed pace or R pace or whatever we want to call it, right? You know, is the issue for us has been, looking at, like y'all have, now trying to um, align something that I believe both of y'all in what Cohn Reznick does in the All Sleep. I want to talk about for a moment, get some reaction. And of course, if folks, and I know we're running out of time, I know we're running up against our hard end at 11, but we started a little bit later. But Jesse, eligibility, rules and regs, in-use impacts, integrating other resources, uh, time available. I mean, readiness. All right. So now I kind of got this checklist that I've got to go through, right? All these pieces, including alignment of what's eligible and what's not. All right. That is so overwhelming as to have people step away from doing public-private partnerships, or what we now believe are P4s, public-private philanthropic partnerships. So if both of y'all were to be sitting across from an elected official, a landowner, developer, community and civic, all right, I think what I heard you say is let's find one point of agreement to go forward
to
on.
start forward with, and
Yeah.
get a navigator. I talked about that a couple of times, right? If you don't have the expertise and you're scared of it,
Yeah.
because I've met electeds who'll just charge right in and they don't mind the complexity. But if you're nervous, if your staff is making you nervous,
Right.
Find your CDFI or find your person at the chamber or find your community, your planning department. Like the Oklahoma City Planning Department helps the smaller communities around it figure out complex things, right?
Right.
Find your navigator. In some cases, I've worked in disaster recovery. The navigator was the pastor of a church who happened to have a finance background. I mean, you find it wherever you find it, and start explaining it. The first time through, you do have to like get people comfortable.
Right.
There has to be a certain amount of trust. It's human, right?
Well, I'm gonna be
But
somewhat.
CDBG, for example, not everything was leveraged, but everything, in the portfolio every year, the amount of reported leverage was 4-to-1 for the construction activities across the entire country. It was concentrated in a few places and they figured it out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so find one of those places that's figured it out and ask them questions.
And Richard, if I could just interject, because apologies to the audience today, I do have to leave shortly. I have another meeting, and they're outside waving their hands at me. I would just make one final comment. So first off, thank you to Roar Partners. Thank you, Future Proofing America, for the opportunity to speak today. Our contact information is in the packet. If there's any follow-up questions, I would just say, Richard, on your one point, the one thing that I think county and municipal and local officials can do is really begin to use the marketplace of ideas and the forum, as it were, to bring in the investors. So to Jessie's point, contact your local CDFIs. They understand the capital stacks. Contact, data providers, contact property developers, hold information gathering sessions and invite in capital markets participants, because they will bring the pipeline, they will bring the strategies, they will bring suggestions on the ways that local and county governments can instrument different incentive programs, whether it be workforce credits, whether it be assessment opportunities, whether it be potential subsidies to encourage investment. I think right now, the more that local authorities can, under this umbrella of resilience is an investment that we all need to make in our communities, create the marketplace to encourage the capital markets participants, it'll simplify the engagement so that it isn't simply a function of someone showing up with a deal expecting a yay or nay. You need to have that dialogue now, and I think that they can use that platform to encourage those dialogues.
So I'm going to wrap it up with thanking both of y'all for your patience and tolerance on a little bit of the technical glitch this morning. And I'm going to be a little self-serving, Ted, but hopefully it's taken the right way. I think with y'all, the two of y'all, with Cohn, Reznick, and the folks that we've brought together, that we really wish to, under this Future Proofing America 2026 campaign, Jessie, we would like to help be the navigators, not from overwhelming the locals and drop shipping ourselves in. But I do think that we have that opportunity to work with those who are on the, with us, who will listen to this. And that's really where I want to help folks move quickly, is that we've really tried to align the resources in a way where I think now, Jessie, working with some of the folks that you and Ted and others know, what can we do to support them, but accelerate through all of this maze? Because it's not a question of whether the resources are available, it's a question of how do you structure it. So thank you, Ted. Thank you, Jessie. Thank you to those who joined us in what I call the live studio audience, because I've also gotten a lot of texts about apologies, but we're going to share the deck. We're going to share the recording, but please do not feel that you got to go directly through me. Go talk with Ted and Jessie. You've got their contact information, but Ted and Jessie, let's go do projects. Let's get 5 of these really moving is our objective. So thank you both. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody stay safe and sound, and we'll look forward to talking with you very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.